Welcome back to the Purple Political Breakdown. How's it going? How's your day been? And we are back at it with another very interesting conversation that I'm going to have on the podcast, of course. We got an interesting guest. If you guys remember when I had David on to talk about some systematic solutions and those different nuances on how you would apply those systematic solutions into American society, one thing that he mentioned that could be a useful tool was a organization referencing living room conversations, and we got a person who's going to be talking about that. It's basically what it does and how it can play into understanding different political aspects in society as of right now. We have our guest, Joan Blades. A little bit about her. Joan Blades is a co-founder of Living Room Conversations, an open source effort to build respectful connections across ideological, cultural, and party lines while embracing our core shared values. When we care about each other, we work to find ways to meet each other's needs. Also a co-founder of momrising.org and moveon.org. She's the co-author of the Custom Fit Workplace and the Motherhood Manifesto, and mediator by training and inclination. She believes in the power of citizens and our need for respectful discourse while embracing our core shared values. So without further ado, let's bring in Joanne. How's it going?
It's going good. Good to be here.
No problem, no problem. Is it Joanne or Joan? How do I pronounce it?
Joan.
All right, excellent. So to kind of start off, when it comes down to it, I say this all the time. I like people to kind of get to know the guest that comes onto the podcast, to kind of understand their affiliation, their political leanings, to understand the perspective that they're going to come from when it comes down to the conversation itself. So the first question I got for you is, what would you consider your political affiliation to be?
I'm definitely from the left. I'm a progressive. I'm born in Berkeley, and as a co-founder of Move On, that's kind of known as an organization that's on the left. But that means that I'm good when I'm paired with my conservative partners, right? Because things are more interesting that way. And in fact, I am much better at understanding things when I'm talking to people that see things differently than I do.
That's the goal. That's very important, especially when it comes to politics, because the differing opinions, you're going to have that all the time. Trying to find that compromise is what's valuable. But speaking of speaking to your other side, the other people, of course, as of right now, people believe that we are very much divided. So for the most part, when it comes to the left and the right, we are getting more extreme. As of right now, for you, do you believe that this is the most divided we've been since perhaps even something like the Civil War?
It's the most divided we've been in my lifetime. And, I can't say for before that's not my. And when I say that, the Vietnam War was within my lifetime, and maybe I was too young, but I do believe this is more divided. I've never seen the media so strongly pushing towards division. And part of it is we have a very different media landscape now. There used to be one story that we shared, and then we have differences about that. And now we live in very different narratives. That's one reason. One of my partners is John Gable, co-founder of All Sides, which is news from across the political spectrum. And, when I look at the headlines and I see left, right, and center side by side, and then I read those stories, I'm better able to understand where the disconnect is happening. And that's, it gives me some encouragement that we can find a way forward that will work.
That's a very positive outlook, which I definitely appreciate. I do think that we can progress towards a certain commonality. I do think, obviously, with the rise of social media, of course, and getting people's opinions basically right in your face, it really kind of showcased a level of not perspective, but a level of understanding of people's political affiliation and leaning and what they truly think about things more so than any at any point throughout history for the most part, because you can kind of see it consistently every time and get news consistently in your face all the time. People got more of an understanding of how the world works, and it's kind of tough as of right now when it comes down to people trying to understand politics but not really knowing the details, the ins and out behind it. Do you have something to say to that?
I would actually say that there are rewards that our AI is directing us to get news that meets our views. So one of the reasons for all sides is you can be intentional about getting other news. If I get news about climate and my friend John gets news about climate, we'll get really different stories because the news services are trying to serve us that which reinforces our belief system. And that's how we get into these very separate views about topics. And we're also finding that people are being rewarded for pushing on the places where we are the most angry, we are the most anxious, fear, anger, anxiety, that goes to a part of our brain that has to respond. Whereas the parts of our brain that are about trust and connection take more time and more patience. And that's what people want. You've got a lot of people that are turning off the news these days because it's just sucking us down this rabbit hole of thinking those people are ignorant or cruel or you name it. And that's not doing us any favors. Most people want to be fair. They want to be kind. They want to contribute to the world in positive ways. And yet, when I look at what I'm seeing on either side, we're getting reinforced for a story that's very different than that. So how do we actually own it and create the kind of society we want to live in, rather than the society that is maximizing profit for certain news providers, or maximizing winning for certain leaders? We need to shift and figure out a way to be the society we want to be.
No, I 100% co-sign that. I've spoken consistently about people getting entrapped in these echo chambers, of course. Obviously, when it comes to algorithms, they push you to the things that you're most interested in. And a lot of these things tend to reinforce your opinion, as you mentioned, consistently, to the point where you may end up in a very extreme position of your initial position that kind of started out pretty surface level without the nuance behind it. So that does exist right now consistently. And with all this information being pushed into your face, you would hope that this is an opportunity for more understanding. But in reality, what is going on with how basically social media and just the internet in general works is you have an opinion, you get more information about your opinion, and you get more people echoing that same opinion. So yeah, that's something that does exist right now. And we got to have a measurement of a better perspective on understanding the information that's consistently coming at you. The next thing I do want to ask you about, with that said, with the two sides, with the middle, of course, do you believe that with the two sides being kind of as divided as they are as of right now, it would be the perfect opportunity for a more middle, moderate, centrist kind of political party to kind of mediate the two sides to an extent and really kind of bridge a gap in terms of current political discourse for America? do you think something like that would be very valuable?
I think the political dynamics are structured right now to reward the extremes. And that I really like ranked choice voting, because then you're giving impetus for having not just one person you like and everyone else is bad, but there's reason for a person running for office not to trash other people, so they'll be number two, and it gets the maximum number of people supporting the person that actually wins. I don't see a viable way right now, with the way we've structured things, that a third party is going to succeed at that, because there's too much fear involved in the reality of right now we are seeing the other party as off the rails, and they're going to destroy the country. That's the way this is perceived on both sides. Now, certainly, for me, I see it as that other side's doing, but I know they see it the same way, just going the other direction. It would be nice if that were the case. So I'm seeing it's all part of the fight. And what's tricky about this is, how do we change the system to allow for that kind of more moderate, I don't like the term moderate so much as balanced and thoughtful. I want balanced and thoughtful people to be able to be our leaders. And it's too much about almost celebrity sometimes. And that doesn't seem to be serving us well. Not in my opinion.
Fair enough. Ranked choice voting, I do appreciate what it's trying to do. Personally, I brought in people for my podcast that is advocating for something called star voting, which they believe is a lot more efficient than ranked choice voting. There's kind of a bad stigma from what I'm aware of, that certain things that ranked choice voting doesn't cover, that other voting strategies such as star voting do cover. But ultimately, these different voting systems can be more representative of people's vote, which is the hope at the end of the day when it comes to these different voting reform programs that we may implement at the local and the federal level. And I do agree when it comes to moderate. I don't like to use the term moderate. I just say I'm in the middle for the most part, because the stigma against people who are moderate or centrist is that you don't have an opinion, really, is that hey, you're right, and there's really nowhere to go from there. I say I'm in the middle, but from all the moderates that I've met, that's the type of people I meet, and I'm like, you're not really pushing anything forward, so it doesn't really help anything. But balance, I like that terminology, a balanced political party that is willing to kind of listen to both sides. With that said, let's kind of dive into kind of the main topic that we are discussing. And the first place I want to go to is to really understand what you do over here when it comes to living room conversations. So can you explain what that is and what you guys are trying to do?
Living room conversations have been around since 2010. And the objective is to give people the opportunity to have a good conversation, of really listening to people with very different viewpoints. We have over 160 conversation guides on topics ranging from guns and responsibility to forgiveness to technology and relationships, more curious, less furious, mental health. And they're all kind of marvelous. I've had so many good conversations over the last decade because of these guides, because they're intimate conversations. They're 4 to 6 people, and they start with a group agreement around how we're going to talk. And the conversation agreements are basically what we learned in kindergarten. Be respectful, take turns, own your part of the conversation, be curious. We can do this. Most people know how to do this. And one of the interesting things is when we're in person, it's hard to dehumanize someone. That's one of the pieces of social media. Somehow, when we're in social media, there's a lot of people that can not really understand that it's a real person on the other end of the line. I'm not sure if that's the right term to use in that case. They typically take 90 minutes, my favorite kind. We can do it in 60. We've done them in 40. We've had them in faith communities, in libraries, in bakeries, in bookstores. It's a community process and higher ed. And it allows people to talk about their own personal relationship with the topic. And the guns conversation is, you'll notice it's not gun control, it's not gun safety, it's guns and responsibility. We're trying to make it welcoming as to as broad a group of people as possible. And then the questions we ask, the first round of questions are simple and the same pretty much for each one. And it's, what would your best friend say about who you are? Or what's your mission in life? So you get a little bit of the values of the people you're sitting with. And the second round is about your relationship with the topic at hand. So in the guns conversation, it's, where did you learn about guns? Have guns had any impact on your life? And I don't have the exact conversation questions in front of me, but it's telling your personal story with that topic. One of my favorite new conversations is about persuasion. And, it's so funny. We do this, we try to persuade people and we're not successful, most of the time when we're trying to persuade people. Why might that be? And it's just an opportunity to sit and think, when have I been successful? When have other people been successful with me? And when is it worth persuading? When do I feel manipulated by it? That kind of reflection can be really valuable. At the heart of this practice is the understanding that we don't even really listen to each other until we have some kind of relationship. So if someone I don't know and don't like says something, they might as well not have said it. That's the way most human beings treat things. And, the science tells us that human beings typically make their decisions based on gut, and then they rationalize it after they've made the decision. So it's we're kind of naive thinking that we're actually going to reason someone into changing their minds. It's about this relationship. Who are you? And do I like you? And do I care about you? And all of a sudden, everything changes when we care about each other. That's at the core of this for me. Can we care enough about each other to hold the tension of our differences and begin to look together at what we can do and recognize that, this friend of mine is an amazing person, and yet I really disagree on some key points. That can feel confusing, and especially as we've, amplified our differences, and the amplification has been, kind of conflict profiteers. There are institutions and individuals that benefit from highlighting and zeroing in on conflict. There's way more we have in common then we focus on. It's not doing well for us.
Those are some really good points. And there's two components that I really want to lock in on that are very valuable to talk about. But before I kind of go into those two things, my first question to kind of really give an understanding on how you kind of approach to this, or how you arrived at this type of organization and this thought process, is why did you start living room conversations in the first place? What made you believe that this is something that people needed?
Okay. I live in Berkeley, California. It's notoriously liberal area, and people have self-sorted more and more. I really care about climate. And I didn't understand why conservatives weren't also concerned about climate. Back in 2004, I started having conversations, very intentional conversations with conservatives. And I had good conversations and I learned a lot. And I made friends. And there were some things that we were actually able to do together effectively on a variety of topics. By 2008, it was harder to have a good conversation with someone on the right about climate. That disturbed me, and I truly believe that the leadership is on a foundation of citizen support. And when we fail to be connected and believe that respectful relationship is essential, then, it goes both directions. We need to be able to be the foundation which good people can build from, lead from. So living room conversations are very intentionally designed to not require a facilitator, that the conversation guides are sufficient. If people are able to abide by those agreements, and we all know someone that can't, you don't need to invite them. That's, not everybody belongs in this kind of conversation. But there are studies that show that if we can get 3.5% of the population to really invest and try to shift culture, it can happen. That's doable. And these conversations are scalable. We could have 10,000 or 100,000 conversations in a weekend if we chose. And that's the choice that I'm dreaming people will make. That's why I believe the call to action this year is trust in elections. Because across the political spectrum, people believe that fairness is important. People want trustworthy elections. Trust in elections is related to trustworthy elections, but they're not the same. There's been a campaign against trust in our elections for years now. There's actually been a campaign against trust in our government, trust in our media, trust in each other. This is something that needs to be addressed. And what's exciting about trust in elections is elections are local. This is something that we're responsible for. We're responsible for our local elections. So we should have this conversation, look at our local process. If we look at it closely and we see that it's trustworthy, then we can talk to people in other parts of the country. This capacity to connect people across the country by video is real. In 2019, we did a study with Fetzer that showed that both our in-person and our video conversations had the impact, short-term and longer-term, we were looking for. It's possible for us to do this, but people have to believe that they can be impactful. And that's a tall order these days, right? We have been taught to feel helpless and like other people are manipulating us, and that's not a good orientation. So this is the dream, that we can get organizations and individuals all around the country saying, yeah, our elections are looking good, or if they don't feel like they're trustworthy, it's time to fix them. Don't complain to me about it in November. Fix them now. Personal responsibility, right? This is our responsibility as citizens. Let's do it. And let's do it, start locally, and then once people feel confident, we can make that connection. That's amazing. And it's classic peace building, honestly. When people work on a project together and do a good job, they begin to build relationships. They begin to build trust. Healthy societies have trust. Where our trust level has diminished year after year, and we can't afford to allow that to continue. And I appreciate the reason you do this podcast is because I think you see that, and you're trying to get something different being considered, and that's great.
Yeah, I definitely want to provide a nuanced perspective in terms of all these conversations and the trust in the elections, the trust in the government in general has definitely took a downturn to the point where you could argue that there is a certain level of distrust from both sides, which is potentially dangerous, of course, if you have both sides not trusting in the institution that is the United States of America. But before we dive into the intricacies of that conversation, because it's a very important one, there's two components that I noticed you were talking about when you were referring to what living room conversations and what the value of these conversations are to people. And one thing that you mentioned is the topical conversation has to be somewhat broad enough to not kind of scare people away. And I thought that was very interesting when you kind of referred back to the gun stuff instead of saying we need more gun regulation or talking about how gun rights. Those things obviously will immediately propose an idea to someone from either affiliation of the type of conversation that is about to happen, kind of establishing a point of view right from the beginning. And for the most part, when people do that, they are either going to listen to it and obviously going to listen to very specific parts that either reinforce their opinion or going to listen to parts where they vehemently going to disagree with. And that's not really helpful to kind of understand. I thought that was very interesting. Even kind of going back to what I do right here, which I talk about a lot of different things. I try to be pretty nuanced on all the conversations, even the controversial ones that I have. But I make it pretty known that all the opinions are opinions that I create for myself based on my own value system, but not political affiliation. Because, like I said, I kind of ride with the middle for the most part. With that said, when it comes down to the approaching these conversations in a more broad form and trying to make sure that people don't enter the conversations with preconceived notions, why is that valuable? And what is the best way people can kind of do that on a natural basis, not only in person, but online? Because that's something that's very important and something I consider, but never really consider in a deeper level based on how you explained it.
I think what becomes a lot of communities do these monthly because it's a practice. And learning to truly be curious and ask good questions is tremendously valuable. If you ask people their opinion and you get a political talking point, folks just kind of switch into the political trance. And they're trying to do, the argument and counter argument. It doesn't go anywhere. But when people talk about their personal experience. I had someone on our team was at a table with the guns and responsibility conversation. It was a table that included two men ready to die for their Second Amendment rights and a woman that had been traumatized by guns, not once, but multiple times. And what happened at that table, and it was 6 people, there were others too, but for those people in particular, they heard each other. She heard how the relationship with guns was also a relationship with fathers and, fathers and sons, and a connection that was really important. And they heard about what had happened when, this woman had been, traumatized by guns multiple times. And it allowed them to just accept it. Things are more complex. Things are more complicated than we want them to be when we have this is our side, this is the way we want it to be. Well, maybe there's more to it. And people don't change their minds typically in a conversation, but they get more nuance. And that's a really good start. And they start to care about people that see things differently. One of my friends started to care about climate change, not because I was so articulate, but because he cares about me. We want to think that our brilliant arguments are what it is, but we're human beings, and human beings are about relationships. And as we have sorted ourselves more and more, so we won't even talk about things that are political, these divisions get more and more pronounced. If we hang out with people that are all sharing our viewpoint, that causes us to get even more embedded in that viewpoint. So we're in a negative feedback loop when it comes to polarization. We have to be intentional and change that direction. And people are really unhappy with where we are right now as a, society. So it's a time to, enjoy the fact that we can do something different. This stuff is enlivening. It allows us to have better relationships and have a richer palette to draw from.
Those are some really good points when it comes down to approaching these conversations with the right questions. They definitely can kind of put people in a proper state of mind to an extent. And I know people thinking, hey, I don't want you to mess with my mind. It's more so to kind of have it a clean slate so you are willing to engage in the conversation, of course. When I'm really thinking about like when I do, of course, for the most part, when it comes down to all the things that I do, all the conversations I have, the people I talk to, the content that I put out there, one thing that I've noticed for me at the very least, who kind of prides himself to an extent that I come from a nuanced perspective. I don't let political affiliation or ideology kind of shape my opinions. I allow myself to shape my own opinions. I still notice that people come in, especially those who engage the most, they come in for people who only agree with my opinion or really, 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 really hate my opinion. And they come into it without not really thinking about the nuance of the conversation, thinking about the back and forth and the points I was making for both sides. But I go like, nah, you're wrong. Just the baseline, you're wrong, or the baseline, oh no, I agree. It's like I appreciate people who agree with me. Those people who disagree with me, it is what it is. But there's nothing beyond the surface level agreement or disagreement. And I think what you say in terms of preparing people to enter the conversation or prepare the people to enter the information on a more positive note, I'm going to put it, is valuable. So let's say we ask the right questions. They enter the door, they enter the space. Another component that you mentioned in your kind of description of living room conversations and its purpose is being recognizing people as people, recognizes people as individuals. And I agree when people are in your face, it's easier to kind of put it like see them as human. The problem, or I guess the challenge, is when it's on a screen, right? It's obviously you're not in their face. You sometimes think that it's just a character or number at times, like I'm just talking to someone, it doesn't really matter. How do you believe, for you, in your opinion, and maybe living room conversations discusses this too, what do you think is the best way people can kind of recognize people as humans better online, on social media, over technology, and like how would you go about that?
Well, what we're doing right now, I can see you, and it actually makes a big difference. When we do the video living room conversations, that works too. Hopefully people can take that with them, that intention to be thoughtful, to be kind in other spaces, and remember that there's more going on behind words written on a screen. There are individuals that wrote those words, and that, yeah, there are bad actors out there, and we should not feed them. We should be, encouraging and responding to the people that are trying to have us be a healthy, functional society. I mean, this is a place where there's great possibilities, and it would be a tragedy to destroy it. We're supposed to be, working on the better and better, not the not the worse.
Yeah, the portion of like empathy and sympathy are intrinsically valuable into these conversations, of course, and really trying to be purposeful in your understanding. And something that you mentioned before, I think, can highlight this very well, is the sense that you can start basically from an I statement in terms of your perspective, your understanding, where you're coming from in terms of the conversation will help kind of shape, maybe even provide a nuance to the person. Like, okay, let's use your gun example. Gun responsibility. Both persons who came, you brought up your example in terms of someone who survived the mass shooting versus someone who's a diehard gun rights activist. And then they hear the story of the person who survived the mass shooting. This is where I'm coming from. This is why I think what I think. This is me. When you start from that viewpoint versus going like, you gun rights activists are just unhinged and terrible and you're terrible human beings, that can be huge in terms of providing that trust, that providing that empathy, the sympathy of the situation. So these two components are huge, and when it comes down to it, and it does sound like something that you guys do very well, to kind of go into the topic of conversation a little bit more deeply that you mentioned before, trust in elections. Why is this so important to you? I know you mentioned a little bit before, but why is this so important to you, and how are you approaching this, especially now during election season where it's the most important? It has to be with very controversial, two primary controversial candidates with Trump and Biden.
I'm not paying any attention to the candidates, honestly. I'm paying attention to this issue. We know from 2020 that bad things can happen when people don't believe that elections are fair. Fairness is a value that is shared very broadly. And tapping into people's aspirations rather than their fears is what I believe we can do and we should do. This is a new conversation guide. Last year, mid-year, it's like, hey, we got an election coming. How is this going to be much better than in 2000? we can see what's coming. There's, folks that have done the research. There's a huge chunk of people, no matter who wins, that's going to think it was rigged somehow. That something was deeply wrong with the outcome because of people messing with it. Well, what do you do when you see that? You say, I'm not helpless. This, ultimately, we are responsible for running trustworthy elections. And that means, in this case, it's not relitigating things that have happened before. It's looking at what's happening in my local voting area. Is it trustworthy? And doing that with diverse voices that care about it. This is a conversation guide that is much more action-oriented than there are others. Most of our conversations, people leave with something to think about and may or may not end up doing something. I had this conversation a few months ago, and everybody in that conversation had a next step that they were thinking, I could do this. I could become a poll worker. I could, do something with the League of Women Voters. That's good. That's what we want with this conversation. And it's an entryway to this work. It is not the destination. If you go to our Trust in Elections page, we have a list of organizations that have additional resources for people. Because 6 people is something that, one of these guides can make it possible for people to have good conversation. And it can be hundreds of people having a good but then you need to do a bigger facilitated process. Now, there might be local facilitators that can do that. But if there aren't, there's a dialogue and deliberation organization that has people all around the country that can be of assistance. There are organizations like River Angels that have done work finding where there's agreement along with convergence on certain election issues. And they also have workshops to diminish polarization. There's a rich network of organizations that are trying to make our communities more healthy. And we can tap into it. This is also about trusting people to take the initiative and figure out what needs to happen where they are. And then we have the capacity to help people connect across the country once they've done their local work. But we need to do it, and we can do it, and we can if we choose to.
All right. It definitely sounds, especially making people hands-on, it sounds very productive. I do think sometimes people don't realize that they can be very much involved. And when it comes down to politics and voting, I think there's a kind of a false perception, I say quite consistently, that federal elections are the only elections that matter, where I would argue local elections matter even more so to you as an individual on what is going on in your community. But people don't really think about voting for your local election. They don't even think about getting involved. They don't even know that you can reach out to your representatives if you care enough. They think, oh, it's just the president that matters. And then obviously somehow magically senators get voted in and representatives from the House get voted in. And they don't kind of think about that. That's kind of the forefront or the extent of their mind when it comes to the government and politics. When it comes to people and approaching people to try to help them understand this, how do you go about this? Because like we've talked about, there's a lot of discontent in terms of elections and trust in the government from both the left and definitely the right as of right now. So how do you approach people to help them or to get them to entertain this conversation, see what you can do from there?
Well, I'm talking to you here now. That's one thing. We have a libraries organizer, so she's offering it at libraries. We are working with bridging organizations that are all around the country. There's a group called Listen First. I think it's over 600 different bridging organizations around the country. There's the Bridging Movement Alignment Council, because we recognize we're better working all together. We're only a piece of the puzzle, and we're an open source piece of the puzzle. So everything people need is up on our website. We hope for people to get back to us and tell us what they're doing. But the reality is most people don't. And we know these conversations are actually being used worldwide, which is wonderful. They're open source so that people can change them some if they need some changes to be culturally competent in other places. And we are focused on the US because the team is US based, and we have, some cultural competence among the the group of people, but this is a very diverse country. I will never pretend that we've got it all figured out. We've probably rewritten the immigration guide 3, 4, 5 times because things keep changing, right? We learn more and things change. It's a living document. All these are living documents which have to adapt. And right now, this, I believe, is the call to action that as a country we need to take.
No, I 100% agree. I am interested in this aspect because I'm thinking about the type of people you will be engaging with. There's different demographics of people that you can look at in terms of left ideology, political ideology that you probably would kind of talk to. I would assume that they would be the ones that have more discontent would be younger individuals from the left, and then on the right, it would be older individuals who have discontent, from what I'm aware of as of right now, from both sides. Do you approach them the same, or do you approach these people differently when it comes to different age groups, different ideology, when you're trying to establish an idea of building trust in elections?
I think the reality is we are trying to meet people where they're at, and the team is sharing the materials, and it's people that are in leadership in rural America, in different parts of America, that are going to be able to introduce this most effectively. Not me. I just have this one piece here, and I'm doing things locally and some things nationally. But yeah, it's a shared responsibility that we all have. And I do my best to get it out there and to recognize that there are leaders all around this country, and hopefully this will be a tool for them to do what they need to do.
All right. My final question when it comes down to this is that because there's a call to action, because there's a want of people kind of getting involved, what is your end goal from how this is from what you guys are doing in terms of trying to establish trust in elections from people's involvement? What do you believe should be the end goal for your organization? Then hopefully the kind of feedback loop of what this may do to American society as a whole.
Well, I mean, the end goal for this conversation is to have a peaceful election where people feel a high degree of confidence that it was run well, and are able, when the conflict profiteers start, flinging potatoes or whatever they're going to fling, mud, to say, no, we did it well. And, I've talked to people in other places and I trust them. I believe that we have done this very well. And it's, elections are human endeavors, so they're not perfect, but they can be very good, and they should be very good. And when you have that, and you also have a shared agreement that violence is unacceptable, and a peaceful transfer of power is what successful democracies do, and that one of the candidates or only one candidate wins, and that's what we expect and we accept, that's, a successful democracy. And we are no longer rating as a fully successful democracy by those that evaluate the strength of democracies. I find that horrifying.
I definitely agree. I very much appreciate the way you guys are going about it, because it's a very smart way to do it at the end of the day. You can inform people as much as you can and provide the nuance and the knowledge at the end of the day. But if there's a disconnect in terms of the individual believing that the powers to be is a separate entity that has a certain level of control that is out of your hands, then no matter how much understanding or nuance you provide, the disconnect will never kind of get mended. And the way it seems that you guys are doing it is you're telling these people, you're informing these people that you can be a part of the process. You can see firsthand how it works, and you can ensure with your own hands that this election is as trustworthy as possible. And seeing that with their own hands, being a part of the process, it makes it more difficult for someone who actually understands how elections work and understands their role in the election to say that, oh, I still don't trust it, even though you're part of the process. You're a part of the institution that is voting in America. So that is a very intelligent way to approach it, and something that probably should be reinforced a lot more in terms of politics in general, that, like you said, we are a democracy. We are a system that only works when the people are involved with the system. You can't really think of it where we just have kings controlling us, where you and everybody else in the community, we vote these people in the first place, right? So the more we're involved, the more we can shape the country that we believe is the best country it can be, the best America it can be from at the end of the day. So with that said, is there anything else that you kind of want to kind of touch upon, or that you haven't mentioned that you want to say as of right now regarding what you guys are doing in living room conversation?
I think you've done a great job getting the key point out on this. And I hope that people will go and try out a conversation. And it can be the trust in elections conversation, or it can be, forgiveness is the conversation that's been number 1 or 2 downloaded for the last better than a year. These conversations are deep. They help. They're good for families too. But signing up so you hear about new conversation guides and have kind of an ongoing understanding of things that are coming out, because we are always creating new materials and learning from our users, which we're grateful for.
All right, excellent. Any last thing that you want to plug before we wrap it up?
Sign up for Living Room Conversations. Sign up for allsides.com so you have news from across the political spectrum, and be part of making us the kind of society we want to be. And thank you.
All right, excellent. So hope you guys enjoyed today's podcast episode. You can find all that information on my website, www.purplepoliticalbreakdown.com, as well as the information in the description. If you're watching or listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, make sure you rate it 5 stars. Of course, as we continue to spread the word and spread the motto of political solutions without political bias. Hope you all enjoyed. Y'all have a good one. Take care and peace.
Thank you so much.